everybody for joining us this morning. For those of you who I haven't met in person, I'm Whitney Diver McAvoy, the President and CEO of the Yountville Chamber of Commerce. Thank you so much for joining us for our special Zoom meeting with the one and only Rob McMillan, EVP and founder of the wine business division of Silicon Valley Bank. And Rob's joined us a couple years in a row now and is gonna give us some insight into the state of the wine industry. So Rob, thank you again for joining us as always. It's such a pleasure. And I know a lot of folks are really excited to hear your presentation this morning. And again, if you guys have questions, just type them into the chat and we'll go ahead and ask them of Rob as they come in. Turn it over to you.
Well, thanks everybody for showing up and listening to me. I'll start by apologizing because this is speaking is normal for me, but typically I present a state of the industry report in January, write a report, and then I speak on that with updates pretty much throughout the year. This time, pretty much everything that happened before February is useless. So it's, I can actually talk about some of the consumer things that still exist underlying, and maybe we'll get to a couple of them. But the reality is it's pretty hard to focus on anything unless you're talking about COVID in the title. That's the way the press is. I don't know about you guys. I can't even watch the national news anymore because it always starts off with thousands dying. I just have to watch something else. But that's the environment that we're functioning in, and the good news is I think people heard their Napa got approved for its stage 2 variants last night. 6 o'clock, something like that, is when it got approved. So that's nice. That means it's not for tasting rooms yet, but it is for restaurants, and so we're starting to reopen slowly. So that's good news. I'm using you as a guinea pig, and so again, I'll apologize for that, but tomorrow I have another speech with, I think it's 3,400 people and a panel of people as well. So I'll practice on you guys, and forgive me if I'm a little out of sorts because this is the first time I presented this material, but let's start. So here's the first thing we got to recognize is that despite the way you feel, wine demand is higher. And it's just not the way people think right now, but it is higher. And so let's look at what we get now from Nielsen. So let's see if I can how do I do this? There we go. So here's the total wine line. And if you look to the left, you can see that is the end of normal. That's the week ending February 29th. And so that is, those aren't really great numbers when you look at them. We had a 0.5% growth rate in off-premise by the end of February. Not great. And then we get out to here in March 21st, and that's after restaurants close, and just the week earlier, we had sheltering in place orders. So everybody just ripped apart the shelves in the grocery stores. And then we go out to here and we can see the average of what we have in COVID period. So 30.1% growth is what we're looking at. That's year over year. That's comparing last year, same period, to this year, same period. That's pretty good. But obviously that's not something that is in our camp. But the question now is that demand going to continue? And I think the bigger question for most of my customers and people that I talk to is, how are you going to get a piece of that action? Because most of my customers aren't significantly in grocery, they're in other things. So we have some channel shifting that's going on. Let's look at what's happening with alcohol. So this line is total fast moving consumer, this FMCG, that's what they call it, fast moving consumer goods. And just as a comparison to alcohol is actually doing better. So all that pantry stuffing and consumer behavior that's out there in grocery, it's actually better for alcohol. So alcohol has always been the case. It's recession resistant. That should give us some level of comfort, knowing that the consumer actually is desiring alcohol, and whether that's spirits, beer, or wine. And we'll look at some of those numbers in a second. Right here is what's happened. It's kind of a similar looking chart with beer. You can see that's up 17%. If you look at wine, that's doing a little bit better, up 27.7% in this period. And then this one here is spirits, which are up 32.9. So spirits were doing better than wine before, and they're still doing better, which is inevitably we'll get back to the discussion of why that's happening. But for today, it's probably a secondary topic, and we'll probably skip over that one for now. Now, important to recognize this is off-premise. This is grocery, right? So it doesn't mean that total demand for wine is up 27-30%, because that's just grocery. This is channel shifting. So Nielsen says you have to get to 22% growth in order to make up for everything that's come out of restaurant. So, it's still growth, but the growth rate is probably something closer to 10%, but that's growth. That's a lot better than 0.5% that we saw on that other slide. Direct to consumer. So here's one view. This is what we saw with direct to consumer volume and value. And you can see it was kind of starting to shrink as we go through 17, 18. And then here's the first two periods, at the beginning of this year. And again, this is something we talked about in the State of the Industry report. They're not great trends. And then we get to March and April. And there's two things that are worth noting there. One is volume now is higher than value. So we talk about premiumization a lot. We talk about how people are willing to pay more for better bottles. And as I said in the State of the Industry report, that's a trend that is in its final legs. And so here what you see in direct-to-consumer shipments is both volume higher and value lower. A lot of that's on Napa. The data show that Napa's prices are dropping per bottle in direct-to-consumer channel. I don't think that's a surprise when you look at the data that are out there. Free shipping, by the way, is kind of a given at this point. Everybody's giving away their shipping. But you see, with an excess supply to start going into this year, you see a lot of people dropping 10, 15, 20, 30, even 40% deals that are out there. So I'm loading up. I'm doing my part. Here's some interesting data that nobody has seen yet. And so this is more winery-based data versus the last one, which actually had last slide had a lot of retailers in it. So like wine.com, Wink, Naked Wine, like that. So they weren't all producers. These are mostly producers in this data here. And so what you can see here is the green is phone, yellow is club, what is that? Bluish is effectively tasting room, point of sale, and then the purple is e-commerce. And so here's on the left side is pre-COVID, and then you can see what happened on the right side post-COVID. So starting right away on March 20, you can see that club just accelerated. And in talking to lots and lots of wineries now, I was really interested in one specific thing, and that was 100% of the people that I talked to said that their spring club shipments went perfect. There's no problem whatsoever. And in some cases, they had a dropout rate, 5, 10, 15, sometimes as high as 20. That's rare. When I say dropout, I should actually add into that putting club purchases on pause, which is always a good idea to allow people to do that. But despite that, there's a large number of people that were still buying wine. There's still a lot of people want wine, that want good wine, and not just the grocery store wine, but the kind of wine that all you guys make. So here's the numbers that kind of support that. So if you look at the left side, here's what's happened January 1st through March 13th. You can see phone was about 11.4% of total sales, of total direct sales, I should say. March 20th, it went up to 14. So a little bit of growth in phone. You hear a lot of people talking about phone right now, but the real growth rate has been modest. And by the way, this phone does include the guys that are like Chatterbox and some of the others that actually do that stuff for you as a vendor. So that includes that. So there was a little bit of growth in phone, not a lot. And by the way, I think, as I've said for a long time, I think phone and any way that you can get consumption away from the tasting room is what you really want to do, because we have obviously a choke point that's super obvious at this point. I've been saying it for a very long time. You need to take the experience on the road. Not only, I had no idea this was going to happen, obviously, but the reality is we have to find new ways to get consumers to sign up for clubs. We can't just have them, we can't insist that they come to our tasting room, and certainly not now. I have data that I've looked at before. 80% of Napa's wine clubs are made up from people that take longer than a day to get here. They have to actually get a hotel room. So that's what we have in our clubs. And obviously, you're not going to get those people to come in this kind of an environment. That'll change out. Here's club and subscription. It's up. That's the big one, up 11.8. Tasting room obviously down significantly. There's still a little bit of tasting room that's out there. That's more curbside pickup and stuff. And then e-commerce. Surprise, surprise. E-commerce is up a lot. Again, the data that I've had suggested it was less than 3% of total for wineries. And, your customers that want your wine have been digging through the internet to find you. And so e-commerce has actually taken off. Thank God that we had shopping carts and that we put some focus on that. This is a chart that we ran from last year's State of the Wine Industry report. It's a little bit alarming to me, because we asked people, how many you actually have full-time, part-time, whatever, that are looking at your consumer data. And in this environment, if you didn't have good consumer lists, trying to actually call them in a phone type of capacity, or in a club type capacity, if you didn't have that already, then you'd be in trouble. Something I've been talking about again for a very long time is how we make a mistake as an industry in having people walk into our tasting rooms, and if they don't buy, if they don't get into our club, then we lose their information. They walk back out. And how valuable is that information today, right? If we had collected all of those people that have tried our wine, being able to get out there and market to them would have been an awesome thing. So collecting names ends up being important, and then data hygiene, having somebody to manage that information equally is critical. So here is, I want to just show you the channel shift that's happening in wineries. This is data that I pulled together yesterday. So this is March 20th on the left. And you can see down here in the bottom, this is Lost Restaurant and Tasting Room. So we had, I woke up on, was it March 15th, something like that, 13th? And, my customers had lost on average between 40 and 60% of their typical sales. That was a bad day for me as a banker, obviously. And, we're still having to deal with that as banks getting through this crazy PPP program, and for us figuring out how to give our customers more liquidity, even if they, increases in their credit facilities or waivers of covenants. It's just the workload has been off the hook because we're not staffed for that kind of activity. Nobody is. But this is what we woke up to on March 20th, and then here's what we have 8 weeks to May, and you can see just massive changes, right? So our phone and e-commerce, which was combined 3%, now it's 10% phone, 16% e-commerce, pretty incredible. Exports dropped a little bit. Off-premise wholesale is up a little bit. We don't have a lot of people that have in the smaller family wine business. We don't have as much off-premise. We have a lot of people that are in, they have wholesale, but a lot of that was restaurant. There is still some restaurant sales taking place. And again, tasting room, a little bit of there. Mailing and subscription, roughly unchanged if you had that kind of a program. Wine club gone from 23 to 35%. So this is the kind of channel shifting that we are dealing with today. And the question for me is, how much of this sticks? Are we going to chase the consumer into the grocery store? I think it's, from a practical standpoint, difficult. And as it relates to restaurants, there's a couple of issues that we're going to face. Even though they're reopening, they're going to have half the capacity, just like tasting rooms. So I guarantee you there's going to be a couple things. First thing that they're going to do is they're going to work down their existing wine inventory to the extent that they have wine in their cellar. They'll work that down, and then they're going to start focusing on fewer labels, the right ones, whoever that is. So the opportunity to actually see restaurant wholesale increase for most of the people on this call is probably small. If you're not already in grocery, you're probably hurting. You're not going to be able to really get into that very well. And then with restaurant, it's just not going to be what it was. And by the way, the restaurant was trailing off as a channel for quite some time. It was down to about 15% for the average winery. It'll fall even less. There's many reasons why that's falling. One of the biggest to me is price. It's absurd what restaurants do with markups. And on a per serving basis, wine is already expensive, about twice as expensive relative to spirits per serving. And in a restaurant, it's even worse, right? If you go just normally, if you go into a grocery store, spirits and wine, it's about, like I said, about 2x per serving. But when you go into a grocery store, that widens because of the markup. Consumers just aren't going to pay that anymore. And so that ends up being a problem we're going to all have to think through. So that's the good news, but we're not getting our fair share. Back to who are the consumers that we're attracting in Napa? Today it's Gen X and boomers largely, but the millennial in particular is a problem. Now, what happens when we do reopen? Well, there's some good things that I think we'll have going for us, and that is the local economy. If you think about who our customers might be when we open up, it's probably not going to be as many older people. I think the older consumer who on this thing is your dominant consumer, by the way. They're probably going to be staying at home more. They're probably less likely to want to get out. On the other hand, I remember being a young man and thinking I was bulletproof and taking risks that I can't believe that I, that I did and still survived. And I think that the younger consumers are going to be the ones that are going to want to get out and travel. I've seen some data that suggests the younger consumers are looking to get on airplanes because the airlines are giving unbelievable deals to fly to Hawaii. Now, obviously they're not, you got to shelter for 14 days if you go there. But, eventually things will start to open up. And I do think we're going to be led into consumers, into tasting rooms and hospitality by those younger consumers. And now that means you have to think through, you know, are you actually selling wine to younger consumers? How do you do that? And so far we haven't done a very good job. We've had, in Napa in particular, we've had very small numbers of people. And forget that thing where it says Washington is attracting the same age consumers as other regions, because I dumped this slide. This is the Napa, this is the right slide. This is the Napa slide, but I used my last speech in the end of March. It was actually in front of people. So ignore that part. I'll get rid of it for my next thing. And here's another one, is the Washington one that's in here. But, you know, you can see what's been happening in tasting rooms. Napa County's been declining. Sonoma County's been declining. British Columbia, shorter time that they've actually been doing it. Washington was up, Oregon was up. And you think about the differences, you know, Sonoma and Napa County have more expensive wines, and rightfully so. They're, you know, luxury wines. They're best wines made in the world. Washington, you know, makes very good wines, as does Oregon, and they're lower price points. So, you know, they've seen good growth. That's a part of it. But, you know, that's something that we have to consider. This was before COVID, right? We were already seeing drops in tasting activity. So that's something we have to fix. When you look at Napa County bottle prices, you can see what's happened over the last several years. It started to moderate just a little bit. This is average bottle price for a winery by region. And you can see Napa is way on the high end. And so it's not that everybody has to drop their price. That's not what I think we have to do, but we're going to have to settle in. True luxury wines will still find the consumer to buy their wines. But, you know, we have a lot of wines that are made, like Napa Cabernets, for $225, you know, with a winery that's been around for a very short period of time. And, you know, the competition both domestically and, by the way, for other products. The consumer today is not just a wine consumer, they're an alcoholic beverage consumer. And actually beyond that, they're probably kombucha and sports drinks and other things as well. So we're not just talking about competitive being European, but we're talking about, you know, other alcoholic products. And so that's something that I think is going to be soft coming out of this. We're going to have to find our way. There's another issue is tasting fees. I'm not sure. I was in the news the other day, and this was the only quote that got pulled out into. When you do TV, you know, you talk for 25 minutes, and, you know, then they give you 3 seconds in front of the TV for it. And the only quote that got pulled out in that was something that I mentioned about tasting fees. Our tasting fees in Napa are very high. And I've said this before, but if you get on an airplane, the chances of you having the same airfare as the person directly next to you are low. We know that there's just differences in plane fare, and we don't really think about it. But when it comes to tasting fees, we have like one tasting fee, or, you know, in this case, reserve and regular, let's say it that way, where we have tasting fees maybe that are set for different programs, but, you know, but they're all high. They're programmatic. If we're going to attract younger consumers, and the older consumers are going to stay home, especially at the front end of this, we're going to have to do a better job of promoting, and we're going to have to use price. I'm not sure I want to drop our frontline bottle prices. That would be difficult, but we're going to have to use somehow discounting. You know, back in the olden days, we didn't even charge for tasting fees, because tasting was really about trying to get that consumer trial. Once we got the trial, then they would go back to their hometown, and then they would buy in the grocery store. That's the way it worked back in the old days. And over time, we started raising our tasting fees because we ended up with it was a bar scene. It just got to be kind of untenable. But like most things, I think we've gone too far. There are still ways that we can you know, charge those kind of fees, I think, per visit, per visitor. But largely, I think we're going to have to evolve, and that you may have to find an entry level for a younger consumer. It may be on as I was in the news the other day, I suggested surge pricing. So look at your people and how they come into the tasting room, and maybe what you want to do is have more morning tastings for younger people, or when you don't have a lot of people that are walking in, or maybe it's the end of the afternoon. I don't know, whatever your schedule holds, or maybe it's Tuesdays. So there's a lot of things that we can do, but attracting this young consumer has been a problem, and it's actually your opportunity right now, because I just don't think that we're going to see as many older people that are going to want to get out. I mean, it's nice that we have a captive audience in the Bay Area, because this summer, nobody's going to be taking cruises. Nobody's going to be getting on flights to New York. Nobody's going to be getting on flights to Italy. So they're looking for staycations. They're looking for something close. And so now it's our opportunity to get in front of them. And this is one of the things we'll have to maybe think about adjusting in our promotions. So here's what the consumer looks like coming out of this. And here's the question this is from Nielsen CGA. Which of the statement applies to you? I plan on visiting, so premium nightclubs, less frequently, 50%. You can see more frequently is, way off. Airport bars, same as premium nightclubs. Now, we don't have wineries in here, but brew pubs and tap rooms are in there. And this is a wide audience, so this is all age groups. I don't have it split out by age, but in some respects, since we're probably going to have about half of the seats inside the tasting room, obviously we've got to be outside the tasting room, using the outdoors as much as possible. And probably the brew pub tap rooms is what we can think from the consumer on the other side coming in. So maybe the fact that half of them will come less frequently to start, and when we open, we're going to have about half the chairs. Maybe it'll feel okay, but we just got to start and see where it goes. But this is what consumers are saying right now. Fine dining restaurants, 38. So you can see that there's a hesitancy by people to go in to each of these places. So questions, why is demand higher in the worst economy since World War II? We also have to remember that the implied unemployment rate right now, we only run it at the end of the month, but right now I think it's 17.4% is the implied rate. And so in the middle of the worst economy, we have higher demand. So why is that? Well, first, it's the family dinner. Everybody that has had to shelter in place has to figure out how to start cooking meals. If you were a grab and go kind of family before, you actually had to start figuring out how to get recipes. The kind of behaviors that have been happening have been very different than what we had before. Obviously, Zoom now is a huge deal. It didn't used to be, but family dinners end up benefiting wine. People's, going to open up a can of Denison's chili. Say, I'm going to have a nice bottle of wine, and that's kind of a big deal, because when this ends, I think we're going to have some of that continue. Recession. Here's a good news, bad news. The people that are being hurt by this recession, the ones that are unemployed, are largely hourly people, the lower age retail, people that are in lower management positions in retail stores, and then all the hospitality folks. So it's about 70% more of the lower wage. It's kind of good news, bad news. The bad news is, it's the people that are least able to afford it. The good news is, if we can get through this period of sheltering in place and companies still are surviving, they're not going bankrupt, then there's a better chance that we can just hire people, hire people back at some level and, kind of restart the economy. Versus the opposite, which is where you have this capital destruction of companies and companies going out of business. Now you have to raise capital to put companies back into business, to hire people, to actually restart the economy. So it's a much longer process. And, we're not going to have any kind of a V-shaped recovery, but, I do think it's kind of like a Nike swoosh that, we'll get through the bottom here and maybe even immediately as we start to see reopening, we'll start to see some improvement. I think it might happen quicker than a lot of people think. Restaurant sales. Consumers that are looking for normal, they're putting better wine with their meals. That's what I just made. This is a big deal. So couples are at home now, or families are at home. It used to be, kind of a typical thing. If you had a young family with children, somebody would stay close to home so that they could take care of the kids if something came up. And then somebody else would maybe have the commute. Maybe they were the larger earner of the couple. And inevitably, the one that was at home would end up taking care of the kids, get them fed, get themselves some food maybe, and then the other person comes home a little later. They're home at 7:30. A little time with the kids, shove some food in their face, and there's no time for wine in that equation. It's survival, right? Now, people, me and my wife as an example, she's an admissions assistant at Touro University in Vallejo. And she's been working from home just like me. She's in the room over there. I'm at home. I'm not in the Louvre, as my picture shows. When it's 5 o'clock for me, I take my work shirt off and I go put my T-shirt on, and we go have a glass of wine. We have our dinner, and then typically I've been going back to work. I don't change my shirt, but back to my work shirt. But I go back to work. But, we're both home. And so, family dinners are just more normal. And I think that's a discovery everybody's having. And it's a good one for, I think, the industry. Spoilage, it's really hard if you're a wine consumer and you're frugal at all to have wine spoil. And, that example that I was just giving you can't have somebody that's drinking a half a bottle and somebody else coming home late. That just doesn't quite work. But now you can get through a bottle or even two, or a bottle or 1 day or two pretty easily. So I think that's a big part of it. And here's another interesting one, is that I don't know if you guys have noticed, but with sheltering in place, you're not spending as much, whether that's gasoline or obviously, for me, but my restaurant bills have dropped dramatically. And I think my visa expenses probably been cut in half. Once again, it's like, well, what am I going to spend my money on? I've been buying I've been drinking a lot of wine, actually about a bottle a day. But I've been buying wine a lot. So I think that the disposable income plays a role in that. The lower income earners probably weren't your customers to begin with. The fact that the higher income earners are actually still working from home and have jobs probably plays into a good part of why demand for wine is higher. So is it going to continue after these orders are removed? And I think it will. One reason is that is company profits, is that employers now have figured out that not everybody has to work in an office. They're going to save, office premises expense, electrical, everything, facilities that they have to do. They're going to save it by having people work from home. I know my organization, they've told us as early as Monday, or as late as Monday, that we're not going to be going back to the office probably until July, end of July. That saves money. We're discovering that we don't have to travel as much. I'm this is my first speech since March, first part of March. I'm in Washington, and people don't have to travel. That's cutting the travel and education or travel and entertainment budget. I just got my travel and entertainment budget for last month, how much I spent, and it was $11. I don't know what I spent $11 on, but that's what happens. So it's good for companies to allow people to continue to work from home. So these behaviors are being set up to continue, especially in a more difficult economic time. Home meals save money. And then there's something about safety. And this is, I think, should mark this one down, because my speeches before, I talked a lot about how consumers were, we were missing the whole health component of consumption. If you look at what's happening in spirits, spirits are actually, they talk about botanicals and natural, and they use terms that we don't use. We still talk about long days cool night, and we don't even have calories on our bottles, which I think is a huge mistake for a consumer that health really does matter. And but I think we're going to move from this notion of health and wellness, which is the terms that people used before, into a period of where we're talking about well-being, because mental health now starts to play into it. Now, you don't advertise or market your brand as being mentally healthy, because of the other side of that is poor mental health, right? It's not going to work. But when you, I think, really start to touch a consumer, in an emotional way, you get to talk to them about things that are critical to them, and safety ends up being a critical thing about it. So families are a point of safety. It's a normal thing to come together with people that you know and that you trust. You shelter, you talk to people that are in your family or your friends, your network. You just narrow down. So I think well-being will be a continued discussion point we hear post lockdown. And I think if we think through that, we might figure out how to actually get to that consumer dinner table. That's what we need to do. We need to somehow reach that consumer that's shopping in the grocery store and get our share of that increased demand. That is it. So I did it in 40 minutes.
Pretty impressive.
I guess I'll stop sharing my screen. I guess I should do that, right?
Sure.
Okay. There we go.
That was great.
80 of you now.
That was great, Rob. Thank you so much. Does anybody have any questions for Rob? Feel free to take yourself off mute or show your screen if you'd like to ask a question.
I have a question about, can you hear me?
Yeah.
I can.
This is Jacqueline. I work at Hoops Vineyard in Oakville, Yountville. I have a question about what your opinion is for tasting fees. We used to have, let's say, cheaper tasting fees, and then the idea was that we would make them more expensive so that we could, we don't want people to pay tasting fees. We want people to buy bottles. And so we found that if we had cheaper tasting fees, like $30 or less, then people would be more interested in just paying the tasting fees and having a good time. But so we doubled our tasting fees to be about $75 in hopes that we would get the right customer who would want to buy our bottles, which our cab is $75. So what are your thoughts on tasting fees?
Well, I think Napa and Sonoma are too high. Because if you have a $75 tasting fee, people travel in groups, and they will, I think, even be traveling in groups probably more when we get sheltering in place done. And so you think of 4 people, that's $300 cover charge. If you think about it from a bar standpoint.
We waive our fees though with bottle purchases, and that's our real goal. is we
Yeah.
really want them to buy bottles.
Yeah, and I would suggest that when you have a $75 tasting fee, you're doing what you're intending on doing, which is discouraging people from coming in. Or you could say it the other way and say, well, I'm encouraging only the people that can afford it. But I would argue right now that we have a desperate need to attract that young consumer, and they're not going to pay that fee. They're just not. So
you think $30 fees or $25 fees just to get the people in, and then
I think you have to be careful. So for me, I might try to figure out how to have, just take it off of the COVID thing for a second. In a normal time, I would probably try to figure out how to have a tasting light, if you will. So it would be an outdoor taste, and you hang out at a picnic table.
right?
You don't have to hang with them all the time. So you keep your employee costs low, your service times, but let them linger. The real key is it's not just selling a $75 or $200 bottle of Napa Cab. The real key is that you have consumers that may be first-time consumers. And by the way, the data show that a lot of people that were buying wine online, were first time in that channel. So I do think we do have a lot of new consumers that are starting to come in.
Mm-hmm.
So how do we attract them to our own tasting rooms? I think tasting fees to start are detractant. They were set up that way. So you can still leave that tasting fee in place, but find other ways to lower it. And I don't know if a Groupon's necessarily the solution, but maybe. If you had a person that was walking up to your tasting bar and they had a piece of paper, it was like their airline ticket, and they put it down, and the person would, in a normal world, forget the COVID and the plastic plexiglass in front of you and all that stuff. They would say, welcome, happy to have you, but they would, have a piece of paper.
Right.
But it's really today about collecting names.
Okay.
It couldn't be any clearer now how important collecting names is. And even if they don't buy that $75, you've wasted a tremendous amount of overhead if you got them to come to your winery and you didn't keep a connection.
Right. Okay. That's a good point. Thank you.
Tell Spencer hi for me.
Will do.
Philip, go ahead. I see that your hand's raised.
Hey, Rob. First of all, thank you so much for coming and presenting. This is the second year you've done this for our committee, and this is just invaluable to us. I wonder, in terms of bringing our experience out to people, where do you see the evolution of the virtual experience, and how does that impact, I think, a bigger digital strategy in terms of e-commerce and marketing?
Yeah, great question. People that have followed me a long time know that I started talking about taking the experience on the road when Skype was new. That was a platform that was cool. And I was talking about Skype calls and how they saved money, and you don't have to have as much travel, and it's more efficient. I recognize that it wasn't as good as in person. It's not. I'm so tired of not hugging people. it's driving me crazy, or shaking hands or anything. So obviously the physical contact is, you're touching people. That's tasting rooms are ideal. But it's not going to be successful for us going forward for obvious reasons. So we absolutely have to get out. And so digital is still one of those ways. I think we're still working our way through the right way to do Zoom tastings. I'm sure you guys are all aware of the different things that people are trying. We all seem to be sharing that information. My own advice, if it was me, I would actually start to try to build in certain regions. I've never been impressed by somebody that tells me that they make 5,000 cases and they're distributed in 40 states. That's not building a brand. You can't get to 40 states. But there's, with digital means, the opportunity now to make everybody in your winery a salesperson is enhanced, because not just the tasting room people, but the winemaker, assistant winemaker, the cellar workers, they all come from somewhere, and they can all do tastings. And if you're collecting names, you're going to discover that you have regions that start to build naturally because you have evangelists. For family wineries, there's a good chance that you have somebody with your last name in another state. And you grab that person, you make sure that they're collecting names, that they're walking into restaurants and they're using their name, say, this is my bottle, or how come you don't have my wine? And then you create those digital experiences to reinforce. That's the connection component of it. It may not sell a lot of wine, but it's part of the process. First thing is getting people to taste. The second thing is getting them to notice you, obviously, is the first thing. Get them to taste the second thing, and then get them to buy is the third thing. And then the fourth thing is getting the second purchase, because that's the most important one. When they buy the second time, that means that you have the consumer that loves what you do.
Lynn and then Noel. Oh, Lynn, you're still on mute. Hold on.
Thank
Go
you.
ahead.
Hi, Rob. Good to see you again. Question about direct-to-consumer, the wine clubs. Do you think that it's worth it to do like an entry-level wine club that maybe is less expensive with your lesser expensive wines that you're offering, that might encourage parents that are fans of your wine to buy for their children, just anything to get the exposure out there? And then maybe once or twice a year introduce a more expensive bottle of wine to them within that club?
Yeah, so actually, one of my ideas, they're not all good, by the way, so you don't take all of my ideas, please. But one of my ideas was to have my Netflix. So I have like I had like 4 people or 3 people that could be on my Netflix. And one day Netflix said I couldn't use it anymore because somebody else had used all the channels. But they, for another few bucks, I could have another channel. It's like, okay, press yes, okay, there. Now I have more channels. And I thought to myself, well, how come we don't have, adult family plans where we can have young consumers that can effectively digitally pick from their parents' tasting room? Because a lot of us wine drinkers love sharing what we love with our kids. And, they're developing palates, but they can't afford it. And so, that would be one way to do that. The other question was about entry level. So I've had a concept for a very long time now about an on-ramp. And one of my Napa customers, I talked to them about this 4 or 5 years ago, and they took me up on it. And the idea was to not use Napa grapes, but use grapes from other regions, because their lowest priced red was a blend, and it was $45. Too expensive to get noticed. And so they created not a blend, but a wine from, in this case, it was Lake County, and I think they might have had a little Lodi, but it was Lake County and Mendocino mostly. Vineyards that were good. They made really good wine from it in the style that they liked. And then they practiced with one distributor in Minnesota, and it worked out fantastic, because what happened was, it was $25. And what happened was the distributor in Minnesota, sold out almost immediately, and he wanted more. And what ended up happening is that the older people would come in and they would try it, and they would say, that's not my style. And the younger people would come in and say, oh my God, this is better than I've been drinking, right? So it did exactly what you were trying to do. And then they had methods, their email address, or, you can put things on the thing on the cork, bring this to the tasting room, and, for free tasting. There's lots of different ideas you can come up with to try to collect those names again, and again, build that base, build that connection. I think if we don't have an on-ramp, and never sell that $25 wine from your tasting room. That's a horrible idea. Thank you. Yeah, this is marketing. And if you're and it's not a second label. If you're just going to go make a second label and try to sell 20,000, you make 10,000, you're going to sell, I'm going to sell 20,000 cases. No, it's not about moving cases, it's about making money. And at $25, you're probably not going to make enough money to have it matter. But it is marketing. If you could have a free marketing channel, isn't that good? So if it can pay for itself as a marketing agent, and you can use that to collect names and start to connect with consumers, that, that's a good thing. And that's worked out well, by the way, for this one client.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Noel.
Hi, Rob. This is Noelle Resnick with Partners 2 Media. Thanks so much for joining us today in Yountville and our chamber. We digital and video market primarily to hospitality and lifestyle, and obviously a lot of wineries and wine businesses here in Napa Valley. And as we all know, the boomers are responsible for a lot of our expensive tastings and a lot of our more expensive wines. But we also all realize that we need to cater more or market also to millennials as they continue to get older. And you answered my question somewhat in your last two responses, but how do you reconcile these two different groups in terms of marketing to them? Because you want to build in one, but at the same time you need to make money, as you just said. So how do we kind of connect the dots between these two audiences for us?
Well, it's a very long conversation, and I did talk about it in the State of the Industry report. So actually, I'd refer you to the State of the Industry report. There's a nice section in there about boomer values versus millennial values, and they're very different. It's like night and day, and until we get off of the long days and cool nights and lifestyles of the rich and famous approach to our marketing, we're going to fail attracting that young consumer. That young consumer does spend money. They spend money on things that they like and that they enjoy. And right now we're missing, and we may miss them if we're not careful. We may miss them as consumers. They may stick with beer and spirits. And people keep telling me, oh, no, they're just not, they're actually at the far end of their millennial, they're almost 40. So how long do you want to wait? And so I would encourage you to go take a look at the report, take a look at the video cast. We do cover that, but it's a long conversation. So I think I'll pass on answering it fully.
Thanks, Rob. Any other questions for Rob before we wrap it up?
Well, my advice for everybody is buy low and sell high, and be safe, I guess. But I think we have such a tremendous opportunity ahead of us. And I'm not saying that just to be positive. I'm not Pollyannish. I recognize how difficult this is going to be. When my clients are losing 40 to 60% of sales, that's tough. But most of them are switching. Most of them are adapting. They're making changes. You saw that one pie chart that had the changes in the channel shift in direct sales. Channel shifting is happening. If you open your doors and you think that it's going to be just like it was before, nobody thinks it's going to be the same from the standpoint of wearing masks and gloves and having sneeze guards and all that kind of stuff. Obviously, that's going to be a very different experience for us. We'll get through that part of it. But if you think that the things that you were doing before are still the same things that you should do, you should think about it a little bit harder, because there's a lot of things that needed to change before this.
Right.
A lot of things that have accelerated now in the consumer world. The digital thing, the dinners at home is a huge deal. And this summer we have an opportunity to actually attract consumers to the Napa Valley. They're looking for something to do, and guess what? The entertainment options are almost zero. There is no football, there is no baseball, there is no basketball, there's no college sports. You can't even go to the beach right now, right? So where are you going to go? Well, the wineries are going to open, and we have a message to give them. Please come. We need you. We're desperate for you. We have to get off of the you know, we're special and you're lucky to be here. That's not hospitality. And most of us don't do that, but there's still, you know, that air that does creep into Napa. Honestly, let's be honest with ourselves. We have to steer away. We have to have these young consumers in particular coming our way, and they're ready. They want to get out. They want to get out of the shelter in place stuff. They want something to do. They can't go to concerts. So what are their options? If we promote, you know, our communities in a way, and we talk about what our wines are like, you know, they're craft, they're plant-based, they're sustainable, they're, you know, we have a lot of biodynamic farming, it's family, it's you know, everything that young consumer wants in a product, and they don't know it. That's that big part of our marketing we have to change. The hospitality function is something that we're going to have to evolve as well. That young consumer just doesn't see things the way that the older consumers do. You know, we like wearing our brands on our, you know, on our shirts proudly. We like driving our BMWs and, you know, whatever we drive, and you know, for us that was a show of wealth, and for younger consumers that's an anathema. It's you know, there's this idea that wealth has actually, you came about it through some ill-gotten way, and you're not sharing, you know, nicely. And we just have to be really careful about the way that we present ourselves to that new consumer. And the opportunity, especially early on, is going to be from that new consumer, from that young consumer. And if we're going to present something that they're not going to want, they're not going to come. And so we have an opportunity, and if we continue to do exactly what we've done when we reopen, we'll fail. But we have an opportunity, so we've got to take it, because we're not going to have this kind of an opportunity again, I hope.
Yeah, that's great, Rob. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. Fantastic presentation. It's always a pleasure hearing your insights. I know it's incredibly valuable for us and our members. So thank you so much, and good luck with your big presentation tomorrow. And hopefully we'll get to see you in person sometime soon.
I can't wait. Thanks everybody for listening.
Thanks everyone. Have a wonderful day. We'll talk to you soon.
Thank
Take care.
you.